Greetings, I'm Professor K, and in this short video presentation we're going to see how we go about creating a replica domain controller in our Server 2016 domain. Now this lab is optional, so if you want to do it, you'll have to create a new virtual install of Server 2016 full desktop so that you can complete it. Is it important? Yes, it is important, because we don't want to leave our forest root out there hanging all by itself without any way to recover the domain. So to help us in this process, we create what's called a replica domain controller, which is an exact duplicate of our forest root. If the forest root goes down, we bring up the replica and we install all of the operation masters and anything else that we have to do to make it the new forest root. You can have as many replica domain controllers as you want. Normally we have at least one to help protect the network in case of the root domain controller does go down. With domain controllers, it's never a matter of if they're going to go down, it's just a matter of when. So you want to make sure that you have a way to recover, and we do this by performing backups and having a replica ready to go. Now I've already configured this Server 2016 full install just as I would Windows 10 or Server Core or any other machine that I need to join to the domain. So the first thing I have to do before I can promote this to a replica is get it inside of the domain. Now currently this machine is called DC2. I've already configured the IP addressing. Let's take a look at that real quick. So I go up here inside of my network adapter. I'm going to go to IP4, and you'll see that I have given it the host IP of 12, and I am pointing it over to my DNS server. The configuring of your machines to join the network doesn't change regardless what OS you're trying to install. If I'm doing Windows 10, Server 2012, Server 2016, Windows 8, it makes no difference. The procedure for joining these machines to the domain remains constant, and it does not change. So to add a machine to an existing domain, I have to have a host IP that belongs to the networking portion where that domain resides. So my domain has a networking IP address of 192.168.145. I then have to assign it a host IP from the available range of IP addresses. Now to find the domain controller, we have to tell it where it can find a DNS server. I have a DNS server installed on the root DC for this domain, and the IP address, that is to say the networking IP address assigned to that domain controller, is 192.168.145.10. So we're going to go ahead and say OK to that, say OK to this, close this out. Now we're back up to my server manager. Now remember, I can use Server Manager to join this machine to the network, or I can use the system properties, but it's much easier if I just use what I have in front of me. So I'm just going to double click this, and that brings up the system properties, and now I can use the change option that I have here. I've already given it a user-friendly name of DC2. Now I need to join the domain. One thing that I forgot to mention, you have to ensure that all your machines are in the same time zone. That's very important. That's because of the timestamps that Kerberos and Active Directory are going to place on everything that they do in communicating with your machines. So make sure they're all on the same time zone and that your time on the clocks is off no more than 5 minutes. So I've typed in my subdomain name that I'm using for my domain, us.cyberoffense.com. I'm going to hit OK. In just a minute it should pop up and ask me for my credentials. It now wants the domain administrator credentials so that I can join this machine to the domain. So I'm going to type in administrator, and then I'll type in my domain administrator password. So I've got my information typed in correctly. Now, one word of warning. If you do not get this dialog box and you get an error message, make sure that your networking adapters are configured correctly for this machine. Once I click OK, I'm then welcome to the cyberoffense.com domain. I'm going to say OK to that. Now it tells me that I must restart for the changes to take effect. I'm going to say close, and now I'm going to restart. My machine has rebooted. We're back up, and I'm now ready to log on. But I need to make sure that I log on to the domain and not locally onto this server. So I'm going to make sure that I select Other User and that I sign on to CyberOffense. So I got to type in CyberOffense \administrator. Make sure everything is spelled correctly. I'm going to type in my administrator password for the domain. I'm going to hit enter, and I'm now pulling down all the policies and user settings for the domain onto this server. I now have a desktop. Server Manager has completed loading up and it has refreshed. I'm going to click on local server, and you'll see that this machine is now part of the cyberoffense.com domain. Now that we have successfully joined our existing domain, we can now promote this server to a domain controller to be a replica. So what we're going to do is go up here to Manage, and we're going to go to Add Roles and Features. Here we're just going to say Next. We're going to say Next, and we got our machine properly selected. We're going to say Next, and here we're going to select the role of Active Directory Domain Services. You can see everything that's going to be installed when we install the Active Directory Domain Services. So we can go ahead and say Add Features. We can click on Next, and we can go ahead and say Next, and we can now click on Install. Now this is just going to again install the Active Directory Domain Services. We will promote this machine to being a replica when this part of the installation has completed. The Active Directory Domain Services have been successfully installed. We can now close out this wizard, and you'll see that we have that warning up here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and it tells me I need to promote this server to a domain controller. I'm going to go ahead and use this link right here, and that's going to bring up the wizard that we need to use. Now we already have a new forest, so we're not going to go that route again. We're going to add a domain controller to an existing domain. That's where we're at. So the domain that we currently have is listed here, and we have the credentials. We have everything we need, so I'm just going to go ahead and click on Next. Since this machine is going to be a replica of the forest root, it wants to install DNS and the global catalog server, and that's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and type in my recovery password for the directory service restore mode. So we're going to go ahead and click Next. Again, you can ignore the delegation for this DNS server cannot be created. Not important. We're going to go ahead and say Next. You can leave everything here unchecked. It's already set for a default, and we can click Next. On this window, we can leave everything as is, and we can click Next. This is your final option. This is the script that's going to be created to promote this machine to a replica domain controller in our existing domain. I'm going to go ahead and click Next. It's now going to run through the checks. Again, don't worry about these yellow triangle warnings. This is the one that you're concerned with up here, where it says all prerequisites checks passed successfully. We can go down here, and now we can scroll, and we can see that that's also available here, and we can click on Install. We can ignore all these default warnings. They're just the default warnings that come with every install of Server 2016 and Server 2012. And again, we talk about this delegation for this DNS server cannot be created. That's not important. It tells you right down here that you can ignore this, and it's going to automatically restart for us. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Our replica domain controller has rebooted, and we're ready to do an input and a Control-Alt-Delete. And now this machine is only going to allow me to log on as administrator to the domain. So I'm going to log on as administrator for CyberOffense using my domain administrator account password. Server Manager has settled down. I'm at my desktop. Now I have my Server Manager in front of me on this new replica domain controller, and it's no different than any other domain controller on my network. For instance, I can go in here and I can add to this Server Manager DC1 and server core and manage them from here just as well as I can from DC1 and its server manager. So I've typed in server core. I'm going to move it on over here to the next window. I'm going to go ahead and add it. I'm now going to add another server. I will add DC1. I'll type in DC1, tell it to find it, and there it is. I'll move this over. I'll now say OK to that. And if I go into all servers, you're going to see that I have DC1, DC2, and server core inside of my server manager on this replica. So that regardless of which machine I'm on, I don't have to jump from this DC2 to DC1 just so that I can manage a machine remotely. I can do it here just as well. It tells me that my server core is not accessible at this time, and that is correct because I have it powered down. You may be asking, so what happens if my root domain controller goes down and it takes the DNS server with it? Well, having a replica also installs DNS. So we see that my DNS server right here is actually a replica of my primary DNS server over on DC1, and that is because they are both Active Directory integrated. So open this up, go to my zone here, and if I right click and I go to properties, you'll see that it says Active Directory integrated. Now that's for both of these DNS servers. So you're seeing an exact replica of what is on my DNS server over on DC1. So if DC1 goes down, this machine will also, so if DC1 goes down and I lose my DNS server, this replica, which is also Active Directory integrated, will take over the role of providing DNS information for all the machines on the network. So now that I have this replica and it has its own IP address of .12, well then I could configure my DNS settings for every one, all my devices on the network, to have a secondary DNS server pointing to 192.168.145.12. That will ensure that in the event that my DC1 and my primary DNS goes down, my secondary DNS server, which is configured as .12 in their TCP/IP settings, will be present. That's going to conclude this short video presentation on how we go about creating a replica domain controller for our 2016 domain. So if you have any questions or you have any concerns about any of the information in this video or the lab, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact your instructor. And I'll see you in my next video.